"You think you can just sit there and mock me, you smug little weasel?" Clint Eastwood's voice roared through the studio, his eyes narrowing into slits as he leaned forward, fists clenched on the guest chair. Stephen Colbert, perched behind his sleek desk, smirked, his glasses glinting as he tilted his head, unfazed. The audience gasped, their murmurs swallowed by the crackling tension. Clint, a legend of grit and steel, had walked onto Stephen's late-night show expecting a respectful interview about his latest film, a raw western delving into the cost of vengeance. Instead, Stephen had opened with a biting jab, calling Clint's work outdated cowboy nonsense, and questioning his relevance in modern cinema. The insult stung deep, cutting into Clint's pride, his decades of crafting stories that defined toughness. Stephen, reveling in his cleverness, doubled down, his voice dripping with condescension. "Come on, Clint, isn't it time to hang up the spurs? Your films are relics, like dusty museum pieces." The crowd tittered nervously, sensing the storm brewing. Clint's jaw tightened, his weathered face a map of barely contained rage. He wasn't here to be ridiculed by some slick-talking host who thought wit was a personality. The air felt thick, like the moment before a barroom brawl in one of Clint's own films. Stephen leaned back, arms crossed, his grin taunting, daring Clint to snap. "You got no respect," Clint growled, his voice low and dangerous. "For the work, for the craft, for what it means to tell a story that lasts." Stephen chuckled, dismissing him with a wave. "Stories? They're just old yarns, Clint. People want fresh, not your recycled macho fantasies." The audience shifted, some booing Stephen's cruelty, others egging him on for the spectacle. Clint stood, his tall frame towering, pointing a finger like a loaded gun. "You wouldn't know a real story if it knocked you flat, you pompous fool." Stephen's eyes flashed with malice, sensing a viral moment. He leaned forward, voice sharp. "Oh, I know stories, old man. Yours just don't sell anymore." The crowd erupted, half in shock, half in thrill, as Clint stepped closer, his boots heavy. On the stage floor, Stephen didn't flinch, his smirk holding firm, but his knuckles whitened on the desk. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a clash of worlds. Clint's raw, unyielding legacy against Stephen's polished, mocking empire. The tension coiled tighter, ready to snap, as Clint's next words hung in the air, each one a challenge. "You want to talk tough? Let's see how tough you are when I call you out for what you are, a coward hiding behind a desk." Stephen's smirk faltered for a split second, his eyes darting to the audience who were now on edge, their whispers a low hum of anticipation. He leaned forward, his voice cutting like a knife. "A coward? That's rich, coming from a guy who plays pretend with guns and horses." The crowd gasped, some jeering at Stephen's audacity, but he fed off their energy, his confidence swelling. Clint's face hardened, his weathered hands gripping the chair's arms as if to keep himself from lunging. He took a step closer, his voice a low rumble, like thunder before a storm. "You think you know me, boy? You don't know the half of it. I've lived stories you couldn't dream up while you sit here, flapping your gums for laughs." The audience roared, some cheering Clint's fire, others stunned by the raw hostility. Stephen, sensing the crowd's split loyalty, pushed harder, his words venomous. "Lived stories? You mean stumbled through cliches, squinting at the camera? Like it owes you money." A few laughed, but the sound died fast under Clint's glare, his eyes burning with a fury that silenced the room. He pointed again, his fingers steady, voice sharp as a blade. "You disrespect the work. You disrespect every man and woman who poured their heart into it. You're a parasite, feeding off others' sweat." Stephen stood now, his chair scraping back, his face flushed with indignation. "Parasite? I'm the one keeping this industry alive, while your films gather dust in empty theaters." The lie stung and Clint's lip curled in disgust. He knew his latest film had packed houses, fans hungry for stories with soul, not Stephen's cheap gags. The stage felt like a battlefield, the air heavy with their mutual loathing. Stephen paced to the side, gesturing wildly, his voice rising. "You think you're untouchable, Clint? You're a fossil and I'm the future. People tune in for me, not your tired westerns." The crowd booed loudly now, their allegiance shifting as Stephen's arrogance laid bare. Clint didn't move, his stance rooted, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You call that a future? Tearing down what others build? You're nothing but a loudmouth with a microphone." The audience erupted, clapping for Clint, their cheers a wave of support. Stephen's face twisted, his composure cracking as he realized he was losing the room. He slammed a hand on the desk, his voice shrill. "You don't get to lecture me, old man. I run this show, and I say what's relevant." Clint stepped closer, now inches from the desk, his presence towering. "You run nothing. You chase claps like a desperate dog. Real men build something that lasts." The crowd was on its feet, some shouting Clint's name, others hurling insults at Stephen, who looked rattled, his eyes flickering with unease. He tried to pivot, forcing a laugh. "This is why nobody watches you anymore, Clint. You're all bluster, no substance." But the words rang hollow, and Clint seized the moment, his voice steady, cutting through the noise. "No substance? Let's talk about substance, Stephen. Let's talk about the time you dodged the truth to save your own skin." The audience hushed, sensing a bombshell, their eyes locked on Clint as he prepared to unravel something Stephen couldn't escape. The studio fell deathly silent, every eye fixed on Clint as he stood like a gunslinger ready to draw, his gaze piercing Stephen, who froze behind his desk. "What are you yammering about, Eastwood?" Stephen snapped, but his voice cracked, betraying a flicker of fear. Clint's lips twitched into a grim smile, savoring the moment. "You know exactly what I mean," he said, his tone cold as steel. "That little stunt you pulled years back, when you threw a good man under the bus to save your precious career." The audience leaned forward, hungry for the truth. Stephen's face paled, his hands fumbling with a pen, but he forced a scoff. "You're making things up, old-timer. Nobody believes your tall tales." Clint stepped around the desk, closing the distance, his boots thudding like a judge's gavel. "Tall tales? I got names, dates, and a whole crew who saw you stab a friend in the back. You want me to start naming them?" The crowd murmured, sensing blood in the water. Stephen's eyes darted to the control booth, as if begging for a commercial break, but none came. He straightened, his voice sharp but shaky. "You got nothing, Clint. You're just a washed-up cowboy grasping at straws." The insult landed flat, drowned by the audience's boos, their loyalty now firmly with Clint. He didn't flinch, his voice steady, each word a hammer blow. "I know about the writer you fired, Stephen. The one who built your show from nothing, who trusted you, only for you to claim his work as your own and toss him out like garbage." Gasps rippled through the crowd, some shouting in disgust. Stephen's jaw dropped, his smug mask crumbling. "That's a lie!" he bellowed, slamming both fists on the desk, but his voice trembled, and the audience wasn't buying it. Clint pressed on, relentless. "You built your empire on his ideas, then called him a hack to cover your tracks. You're no leader, Stephen. You're a thief!" The crowd roared, their cheers for Clint shaking the studio. Stephen's face twisted with rage, his finger jabbing at Clint. "You think you can ruin me with this nonsense? I'm untouchable, you relic!" But the words sounded desperate, and Clint's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. He leaned in, voice low, cutting deeper than any shout. "Untouchable? You're a house of cards, and I'm about to pull the bottom one." The audience was on its feet, clapping wildly, some chanting Clint's name. Stephen, cornered, tried to pivot, his voice shrill. "This is my show, and I say you're done here. Get out!" But Clint didn't budge, his presence a wall of defiance. "I'm not going anywhere until you own up," he said, his tone final. The crowd's roar grew louder, their support a tidal wave behind Clint. Stephen's eyes widened, realizing he was losing control, his empire cracking under the weight of Clint's truth. He lunged forward, voice hoarse. "You'll regret this, Eastwood." But Clint just stood there, unyielding, ready to finish what he started, as the audience held its breath for the final blow. Clint Eastwood loomed over the desk, his eyes locked on Stephen, whose bravado was crumbling like dry clay. The audience's cheers pulsed through the studio, a wall of sound that seemed to push Stephen further into the corner. His face twitched, sweat beading on his brow as he tried to muster a comeback. "You're full of it, Eastwood," he spat, but his voice was a weak rasp, stripped of its earlier venom. "You can't prove a thing." Clint's gaze didn't waver, his voice steady as granite. "Can't I? That writer you betrayed? He's here tonight, Stephen, in this very room." The crowd gasped, heads whipping around searching for the mystery figure. Stephen's eyes widened, his hands gripping the desk's edge like a drowning man clutching driftwood. "You're bluffing," he hissed, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Clint turned to the audience, raising a hand, and from the back row, a man stood. Gray-haired, unassuming, but with eyes that burned with old pain. The crowd parted, whispering as he walked toward the stage, his steps deliberate. Stephen's face drained of color, his mouth opening, then closing, like a fish out of water. "You remember Tom, don't you?" Clint said, his tone sharp as a whip. "The man whose words you stole, whose life you ruined for a few extra bucks and a shiny desk." The audience erupted, some shouting "shame" at Stephen, others clapping for the man now standing beside Clint. Tom's voice was quiet, but firm. "You took everything, Stephen. My ideas, my trust, my future. And you laughed while I lost it all." Stephen stumbled back, his chair tipping, over with a clatter. "This is a setup," he yelled, pointing wildly at Clint and Tom. "You planned this to humiliate me." But the crowd wasn't listening, their boos drowning him out, their anger a living thing. Clint stepped forward, his voice rising, each word a nail in Stephen's coffin. "Humiliate you? You did that yourself, you spineless fraud. You built your name on lies. But tonight, the truth's out." The audience roared, their applause a thunderclap of justice. Stephen's eyes darted to the exits, but there was no escape, not from the truth, not from the crowd's judgment. He tried one last jab, his voice shrill. "You think this changes anything? I'm still the star here." But Clint cut him off, his words final, unyielding. "Stars fade, Stephen. Men like Tom, men who build something real, they last." Tom nodded, his face calm now, his dignity restored. The crowd was on its feet, chanting Clint's name, some calling for Tom, their voices a chorus of triumph. Stephen sat alone, the spotlight dimming on his desk, his smugness gone, replaced by the bitter taste of his own medicine. The audience knew they'd witnessed something real, a legend taking down a fraud, and a good man getting his due.